He's admitted to killing 9 women in Hillsborough and Pasco counties.
He was serving multiple life sentences for betraying his country.
From Wall Street schemers to deadly spies, these criminals face sentences that defied human lifespans. Some received hundreds of years, others multiple lifetimes behind bars. Robert Hanssen, an FBI agent who betrayed his country for decades, stood stone-faced as a judge handed down 15 consecutive life sentences for the worst espionage case in American history. The moment these criminals realized their fate, unforgettable. Let's dive in.
We lost 95% of what we had.
I think what he did is despicable.
On a cold December morning in 2008, FBI agents entered a luxurious Manhattan penthouse and placed handcuffs on a 70-year-old man in a bathrobe. This wasn't a random criminal. This was Bernard Madoff, a Wall Street legend who had served as NASDAQ chairman and advised the SEC on market regulations. Within hours, the financial world would be rocked by news that would send shockwaves through markets already reeling from the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. For decades, investors had clamored to put their money with Bernie Madoff. His investment firm promised steady returns of 10 to 12% regardless of market conditions, a track record so consistent it seemed almost magical. Celebrities, billionaires, charities, and pension funds poured money into his funds, trusting the man whose reputation on Wall Street seemed bulletproof. Behind the prestigious office at the Lipstick Building and the executive client list, Madoff was running a simple but massive fraud. No actual trading occurred. Instead, he deposited investor funds into a single Chase Manhattan bank account. When clients wanted withdrawals, he simply paid them using money from newer investors. The classic definition of a Ponzi scheme. The scam worked for years because Madoff was strategic about which clients he accepted. He often turned potential investors away, creating an aura of exclusivity that made others more desperate to invest. He cultivated relationships with wealthy individuals in elite social circles who brought in friends and family, creating a network of trust that shielded him from scrutiny.
He was getting people to invest in his trading, in his hedge fund.
By late 2008, the financial crisis triggered a flood of withdrawal requests that Madoff couldn't fulfill. With only $300 million left, but $65 billion supposedly under management, his mathematical impossibility was about to collapse. On December 10, 2008, he confessed to his sons that the investment business was all a lie. The next day, they reported him to authorities. The true scale of Madoff's fraud stunned even seasoned financial investigators. His scheme had operated for at least 17 years, possibly much longer. Over 37,000 victims across 136 countries lost money. Many had invested their entire life savings, believing their money was in the hands of a financial genius. Charities closed their doors. Retirees returned to work. Lives were upended across the globe. What drove Madoff to commit such an enormous fraud? His motives seemed tied to his pathological need to maintain the appearance of success. When legitimate investments failed in the early 1990s, rather than admit defeat, he created fictional returns. The lie snowballed until it became too big to escape. The man who built his reputation on financial wizardry became trapped in a mathematical certainty. Eventually, the money would run out. On March 12, 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. He claimed to be sorry, though prosecutors noted he never helped recover funds or named accomplices. The investigation revealed he had never actually purchased a single security for his investment advisory clients during the entire time his scheme operated. Not one stock, bond, or option. The human cost became clear through victim impact statements. People described losing homes, canceling medical treatments, and watching retirement dreams evaporate overnight. One elderly couple now lived in a basement. Another survived on food stamps. A charity that had supported terminally ill children closed its doors. The collective pain was immeasurable. On June 29, 2009, Madoff entered the courtroom for sentencing. Judge Denny Chin had reviewed hundreds of victim statements. When he announced the 150-year sentence, the maximum allowed, gasps echoed through the courtroom. Madoff's typically impassive face twitched slightly, the only crack in his composed facade. The unprecedented sentence for a white-collar criminal sent a clear message. As Madoff was led away, victims in the gallery broke into applause. Outside the courthouse, they spoke of mixed emotions. Satisfaction at the sentence, but the painful knowledge that most would never recover their money. Madoff spent his remaining years at the federal prison in Butner, North Carolina. His wife, Ruth, who claimed no knowledge of the scheme, faced public scorn and abandoned their luxury lifestyle. His son Mark died by suicide exactly 2 years after his father's arrest. His son Andrew died of cancer in 2014, having never reconciled with his father. On April 14, 2021, Bernie Madoff died in prison at age 82, having served less than 12 years of his 150-year sentence. When news of his death broke, victims expressed not joy, but a hollow sense that justice, while served through the sentence, could never truly repair the damage done. While Madoff's 150-year sentence shocked the financial world, he wasn't Wall Street's only criminal to face a century behind bars. Alan Stanford built an offshore empire that promised impossible returns, until investigators uncovered the disturbing truth hiding in his Caribbean banking paradise.
It was an empire that made him rich until today's conviction.
In February 2009, federal agents surrounded a luxury office building in Houston, Texas. Inside, Alan Stanford, a billionaire financier, cricket promoter, and knight of Antigua, was about to face a stunning fall from the heights of wealth and power. His private jets, yacht collection, and sprawling mansions were built on a foundation of lies that was finally crumbling beneath him. The man who once landed his helicopter on Lord's Cricket Ground in London with $20 million in cash would soon trade his custom suits for prison uniforms. For 2 decades, Stanford International Bank attracted investors with promises of impossibly high returns on certificates of deposit. Operating from the tiny Caribbean island of Antigua, Stanford offered interest rates consistently higher than banks anywhere else in the world. Wealthy clients from over 100 countries, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, poured money into his offshore accounts, trusting the charismatic Texan with the wide smile and expensive taste. Behind the glossy brochures and prestigious offices in Houston, Miami, and beyond, Stanford was running a scheme remarkably similar to Bernie Madoff's, but with a twist. He created an elaborate fiction around his investment strategy, claiming to use a proprietary algorithm that somehow beat market returns year after year. He even fabricated financial statements and bribed local regulators to avoid scrutiny. Stanford used his growing fortune to transform himself from Texas businessman to international celebrity.
Stanford organization today maintains in excess of $10 billion.
He became the largest private employer and landowner in Antigua, where the government knighted him in 2006. He launched the Stanford 2020 cricket tournament with a $20 million prize, the largest in cricket history. He sponsored professional golf tournaments and tennis matches. Each high-profile event further burnished his image of legitimacy and success. But in early 2009, as global markets reeled from the financial crisis, the SEC launched an investigation into Stanford's operations. What they uncovered was staggering: a $7 billion Ponzi scheme affecting over 30,000 investors across 136 countries. Unlike Madoff, who mostly targeted wealthy Americans, Stanford had built a truly global fraud empire. What drove Stanford to orchestrate such an elaborate fraud? His motive combined greed with an insatiable hunger for status and recognition. The son of a modest Texas insurance salesman, Stanford craved legitimacy and fame. He wasn't content with merely being rich. He wanted to be seen as a financial genius and global power broker. The fraud allowed him to craft the image of success he desperately sought, even paying for a self-published vanity biography titled Stanford: The Man, the Money, the Vision. As federal agents closed in, Stanford attempted to flee the country. He tried to charter a private jet to Antigua, but was tracked down before he could escape. When agents finally arrested him on February 17, 2009, they found a man still clinging to the belief he could somehow talk his way out of trouble. In June 2011, Stanford went on trial in Houston. Prosecutors presented evidence showing how he had systematically stolen investor funds, falsified records, and bribed officials. Unlike Madoff, Stanford maintained his innocence, claiming his investment strategy was legitimate and blaming the government for destroying his business. After a 6-week trial, the jury took just 3 hours to find Stanford guilty on 13 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. The verdict was unanimous. The cricket-loving knight from Antigua had engineered one of the largest financial frauds in history. On June 14, 2012, 62-year-old Alan Stanford stood before Judge David Hittner for sentencing. Gone was the tailored suit and confident swagger. Instead, Stanford appeared in prison-issued orange scrubs, thinner and grayer than during his high-flying days. As the judge prepared to announce the sentence, Stanford asked to speak. For nearly half an hour, he maintained his innocence, blaming the government and receivers for destroying his legitimate business. When he finished, Judge Hittner delivered his decision: 110 years in federal prison, just 40 years short of Madoff's sentence. As the number echoed through the Houston courtroom, Stanford's face froze in disbelief. The sentence was effectively a life term for the man who once controlled a banking empire. Several of his victims were present, watching silently as the reality of his punishment sank in. Outside the courthouse, they expressed satisfaction with the lengthy sentence, though many knew they would never recover their life savings. Stanford was sent to a high-security federal prison in Florida. His knighthood was stripped, his cricket tournament disbanded, and his empire dismantled. By 2025, after nearly 16 years of legal battles, the last lawsuits related to his fraud were finally settled. The total recovery for victims: about 5 cents on the dollar for their lost investments. While financial fraudsters like Stanford received century-long sentences for stealing billions, our next case involves a more sinister betrayal. Charles Ng committed crimes so horrific that a California judge handed down a sentence that made sure he would never walk free again.
One man would face trial for this atrocity. What kind of justice would he get?
In June 1985, a routine shoplifting arrest at a California hardware store set off a chain of events that would uncover one of the most disturbing crime sprees in American history. The suspect, Charles Ng, had stolen a vise and fled the scene. When police searched his partner's cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains, they discovered a hidden bunker containing videotapes, journals, and evidence that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. What began as a simple theft case would lead to one of the longest, most expensive trials in California history, and an unprecedented sentence. Charles Ng, a Hong Kong native and former U.S. Marine, had paired up with a man named Leonard Lake to commit crimes that began to surface after Ng's shoplifting arrest. When Lake was captured, he swallowed a cyanide pill and died in custody, leaving Ng as the lone surviving suspect. As investigators examined the remote cabin property in Calaveras County, they made a horrifying discovery. Buried on the grounds were the remains of at least 11 people, men, women, and others who had mysteriously disappeared from nearby communities. Inside the cabin, police found handwritten journals detailing the crimes along with videotapes showing the victims in captivity. The evidence revealed that beginning in 1984, Ng and Lake had been luring people to the cabin, often targeting couples or families. They used classified ads for work or items for sale to find their victims. Once at the property, the victims were separated and held captive before being eliminated. Personal belongings of the victims were kept as trophies, while their bodies were buried on the property. One victim, Paul Costner, had disappeared after meeting Lake, who entered his ad to sell a Honda. Another victim, Harvey Dubbs, had vanished along with his family after advertising camera equipment. The pattern became clear. The killers were hunting for victims through seemingly innocent classified advertisements. While Lake died before facing justice, Ng fled to Canada after the shoplifting incident. He was caught shoplifting again in Calgary, setting off an international legal battle that would delay his trial for years. Canada refused to extradite him without assurance he wouldn't face the death penalty, leading to diplomatic tensions between the countries. After 6 years of legal wrangling, Ng was finally returned to California in 1991 to face murder charges.
I can't trust them, I can't talk to them, I can't put my life in their hands.
But the delays were just the beginning. Ng fired multiple attorneys, filed countless motions, and used every legal maneuver to postpone his trial. The case became a symbol of everything wrong with the justice system, a suspect seemingly controlling the courts through endless delays. The trial finally began in 1998, 13 years after the crimes were discovered. By then, the case had become the most expensive in California history, costing taxpayers over $20 million. Prosecutors presented evidence from the cabin, including journals describing the crimes in disturbing detail. Most damning were videotapes showing Ng taunting captive victims. What drove Ng to commit such crimes? His motive appeared to be a disturbing desire for control and domination. The journals recovered from the cabin described a twisted fantasy world where victims were treated as possessions. Ng, who had been dishonorably discharged from the Marines for stealing weapons, had found in Lake a partner who shared his dark impulses. Together, they created a hidden world where they could exert total power over others. After a trial lasting 8 months, the jury found Ng guilty on 11 counts of first-degree murder in February 1999. The evidence, particularly the videotapes showing him with his victims, proved too overwhelming to overcome. Despite his attempts to blame everything on the deceased Lake, jurors saw Ng as an equal participant in the crimes. During the penalty phase, prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, while the defense presented evidence of Ng's troubled childhood in Hong Kong, where he faced strict discipline from his father. They argued that his military training had desensitized him to violence. The jury deliberated for 2 weeks before recommending the death penalty. On July 1, 1999, Charles Ng entered a San Francisco courtroom for sentencing. Now 38 years old, he had spent nearly 14 years in custody since his crimes were discovered. As victims' family members watched, Judge John Ryan prepared to deliver the sentence. Judge Ryan sentenced Ng to death, plus 11 consecutive life sentences without parole and an additional 75 years. As the unprecedented punishment was announced, Ng's typically impassive face briefly showed shock before returning to the blank stare he had maintained throughout much of the trial. Families of victims showed visible relief as the sentence was read, some clutching photos of their lost loved ones. Outside the courthouse, they expressed satisfaction with the outcome, but noted that no punishment could bring back those they had lost. For decades, Ng remained on death row at San Quentin State Prison while his case went through numerous appeals. In 2022, the California Supreme Court upheld his death sentence, rejecting claims of trial errors. However, with California's moratorium on executions, Ng continues to serve his multiple life sentences. In a final twist to the case, forensic technology continues to identify additional victims. As recently as 2022, investigators used DNA to identify remains found at the cabin as those of Reginald Frisbee, a victim who had been missing since 1984. 4 decades after the crimes, the full toll of Ng's actions continues to emerge. While Charles Ng received multiple life sentences for his role in a killing spree, our next case features a different kind of betrayal. Robert Hanssen, an FBI agent sworn to protect America, secretly sold its most valuable secrets to Russia for decades, earning him 15 consecutive life sentences without parole.
Hanssen received payments of $1.4 million in cash and diamonds.
On a freezing February morning in 2001, FBI agents surrounded a park in suburban Virginia. They watched as one of their own, a 25-year veteran counterintelligence agent, knelt down near a footbridge and taped a garbage bag to the underside. Inside the package, classified documents bound for Russian intelligence. When Robert Hanssen stood up, his colleagues swarmed in, guns drawn. The master spy, who had outsmarted America's best intelligence minds for 2 decades, was finally caught red-handed. No one could have imagined the sentence that awaited the man who committed what the FBI calls the worst intelligence disaster in U.S. history. Robert Hanssen wasn't just any FBI agent. He headed counterintelligence units responsible for catching Russian spies. He had access to America's most guarded secrets. Behind his reputation as a straight-laced family man and devout Catholic lay a breathtaking deception that began in 1979. While the FBI trusted him to protect America's secrets, Hanssen was secretly meeting with KGB officers, passing them classified documents in exchange for diamonds and cash. His first package to the Russians included the names of 3 KGB officers who were working as double agents for the United States. All 3 were later executed. What made Hanssen so dangerous was his insider knowledge of FBI operations. He knew exactly how the Bureau tracked spies and could avoid their detection methods. He never used his real name with the Russians, identifying himself only as B or Ramon or Jim Baker. He communicated through coded signals, dead drops, and encrypted messages, leaving few traces of his activities. For years, American intelligence officials knew they had a mole but couldn't identify him. They wrongly charged and investigated other agents while Hanssen continued his betrayal. Between 1979 and 2001, with only a brief pause in the 1980s, he passed over 6,000 pages of documents to Russian intelligence, including details of U.S. nuclear programs, early warning systems, and plans for defending against a nuclear attack. By the late 1990s, the FBI was desperate to find the traitor in their midst. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A Russian intelligence officer defected with a file that included fingerprints from an American spy. Those prints led to Hanssen, shocking FBI leadership who had never suspected this seemingly boring, computer-savvy agent. Instead of arresting him immediately, the FBI put Hanssen under surveillance, watching his every move. They placed hidden cameras in his office, bugged his car, and monitored his computer activity. They created a special job for him at FBI headquarters where they could keep him away from sensitive information while gathering evidence.
He is driven by demons. He is driven by thoughts, unwanted thoughts.
What drove this man to betray his country? Hanssen's motive wasn't primarily ideological. He wasn't a communist sympathizer like early Cold War spies. Money played a significant role. The Russians paid him over $1.4 million in cash and diamonds, allowing him to pay off his mortgage and support his large family. But psychological factors may have been even more important. Colleagues described Hanssen as brilliant but socially awkward, resentful of being underappreciated at the FBI. Espionage gave him a secret life where he felt powerful and superior to his unsuspecting colleagues. On February 18, 2001, FBI surveillance teams followed Hanssen to Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia. They watched as he performed what would be his final dead drop, leaving classified material for his Russian handlers. As he walked away from the drop site, agents closed in and arrested America's most damaging spy. Facing overwhelming evidence, including his fingerprints on documents found in Russian files, Hanssen struck a deal with prosecutors. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to extensive debriefings to reveal the full extent of his espionage. In July 2001, he pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy. The damage assessment was devastating. Hanssen had compromised dozens of human sources and operations, leading to the deaths of at least 3 Russian double agents. He revealed the existence of an intelligence tunnel under the Soviet embassy in Washington and exposed America's contingency plans for nuclear war. FBI Director Louis Freeh called it possibly the worst intelligence disaster in U.S. history. On May 10, 2002, 58-year-old Robert Hanssen entered a packed federal courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia for sentencing. Gone was the confident FBI agent, replaced by a pale, diminished figure in a green prison jumpsuit. His wife Bonnie and their 6 children sat rigidly in the gallery, their faces masks of grief and shame. When Judge Claude Hilton announced the sentence, 15 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, Hanssen's shoulders slumped visibly. The judge added that he would spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. As the unprecedented punishment echoed through the courtroom, Hanssen's composed facade finally cracked. His hands trembled as he gripped the defense table. Hanssen was sent to the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, where he spent 23 hours daily in a concrete cell with no view of the outside world. He died there on June 5, 2023, at age 79, having served 21 years of his 15 life sentences. Even in death, he remains the only FBI agent ever convicted of espionage against the United States, a traitor who earned the harshest sentence ever given to an American spy. While Robert Hanssen received 15 life sentences for betraying his country, our final case involves the ultimate punishment in the American justice system. Bobby Joe Long's reign of terror ended with a sentence designed to permanently remove him from society: death by lethal injection.
The seeds of Robert Long's capture were planted 2 weeks ago tonight.
In the fall of 1984, Tampa, Florida was gripped by terror. Women were vanishing at an alarming rate, their bodies later found in orange groves and vacant lots across Hillsborough County. Police scrambled to connect the dots as the body count rose to 10 in just 8 months. The killer seemed unstoppable until he made a crucial mistake. He let one victim live to tell. This survivor would help bring down one of Florida's most notorious criminals and set in motion a legal case that would take 35 years to reach its final chapter. Bobby Joe Long's path to becoming a serial killer began long before the Tampa murders. As a child, he suffered multiple head injuries that may have altered his brain function. In adulthood, a motorcycle accident caused further damage, leaving him with mood swings and obsessive behaviors. His marriage fell apart, and by 1980, Long was on a criminal path in Florida. He started with a series of home invasions, targeting women who advertised items for sale in newspapers. In 1984, his crimes escalated dramatically. In May, the body of Artise Ann Wick was discovered, the first in what would become a terrifying pattern. Over the next 8 months, 9 more women were found murdered across Tampa Bay. Each victim showed similar evidence, linking the crimes to a single perpetrator. Law enforcement was baffled. The killer left few clues and seemed to strike at random. Panic spread through the community as women feared they might be next. The press dubbed him the classified ad murderer and later the Tampa Bay Killer. Despite assembling a task force of 50 officers, police couldn't catch the man responsible for these brutal crimes. On November 3, 1984, Long made the mistake that would end his killing spree. He abducted Lisa McVeigh, but for reasons never fully explained, decided to release her after 26 hours. McVeigh, showing remarkable presence of mind, had secretly memorized details about her captor during her ordeal: the car he drove, the route they took, even a rare red carpet in his apartment. Once free, McVeigh provided police with crucial information. She described Long's vehicle as a red Dodge Magnum with a damaged dashboard. She recalled glimpsing an ATM receipt and elements of his apartment. These details gave investigators their first solid lead in the case that had stumped them for months.
He was a monster. He is still a monster until the day he takes his last breath.
Using McVeigh's description and partial plate numbers, police identified Bobby Joe Long as a potential suspect. Surveillance teams tracked him for days, collecting DNA evidence from items he discarded. When the DNA matched evidence from the murder scenes, they moved in for the arrest on November 16, 1984. Long's motive appeared tied to deep-seated anger towards women, particularly after his divorce. Psychological evaluations revealed a man with severe emotional problems, possibly worsened by his head injuries. He targeted women who resembled his ex-wife, or who he perceived as vulnerable. The randomness of his victim selection made him particularly dangerous. He had no specific type, beyond opportunity and isolation. Following his arrest, Long confessed to 8 murders in the Tampa area, along with dozens of other attacks across Florida. In 1985, he faced multiple trials for his crimes. In July, he was convicted of first-degree murder in the killing of Virginia Johnson and sentenced to death. Additional convictions and death sentences followed for the murders of Michelle Sims, Karen Dinsfriend, and others. Long's legal team filed numerous appeals over the years, claiming his brain injuries had affected his ability to control his actions. They presented evidence of abnormal brain scans and childhood trauma. Despite these efforts, the courts upheld his convictions and death sentences. After decades of appeals, in April 2019, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Long's death warrant, setting his execution for May 23, 2019. On execution day, Bobby Joe Long, now 65 years old, entered the death chamber at Florida State Prison. Among the witnesses was Lisa McVeigh, the woman whose escape and testimony had led to his capture 35 years earlier. As Long was strapped to the gurney, his face showed little emotion, a stark contrast to the families watching from behind the glass. At 6:55 p.m., the process began. Long's last words were a simple no when asked if he had a final statement. Within minutes, the man responsible for at least 10 murders was pronounced dead. The process had lasted just 12 minutes. As witnesses exited the prison, their reactions varied. Some family members expressed relief that a chapter had finally closed. Others noted that no punishment could bring back their loved ones. McVeigh, now a sheriff's deputy who had built a career helping victims, told reporters that watching Long's execution brought her a sense of closure. The case that had terrified Tampa in 1984 was officially over. Long's death marked the end of one of Florida's longest capital punishment cases, 35 years from first death sentence to execution. For the families of Artis Ann Wick, Chanel Williams, Karen Dinsfriend, Kimberly Hobbs, Virginia Johnson, Kim Swan, Elizabeth Loudenbach, Michelle Sims, and Vicki Elliott, for the next case shows tragedy, and the consequences can be just as devastating.
Came over and was holding his head. Somebody was holding a wound on his leg, and then they said he stopped breathing. So somebody started CPR.
On May 28, 2015, a sunny day in San Diego, U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer Zachary Bube, 39, went for a ride on his red Ducati motorcycle. He was a man who had served his country for 20 years, a gunner's mate and part of Navy Special Warfare Command. His family described him as quick-witted, full of life, and someone whose laughter brought joy to everyone around him. But that day, his journey took a tragic turn. While riding on northbound Interstate 5 near East Street in Chula Vista, Zach encountered 27-year-old Darla Jackson driving a Nissan Altima. Witnesses reported that there was a heated argument between Darla and Zach, veering into his lane aggressively.
And was that from the beginning to the end, or just at certain points?
Yeah, from the beginning to the end.
Zach kicked the side of her car and tried to ride away, but Jackson didn't let it go. Claiming she wanted his license plate numbers, she began chasing him down the freeway. As the chase continued, Jackson drove recklessly, swerving and speeding to keep up with Zach. Witnesses later testified that her behavior was alarming, and her car seemed to intentionally close in on him. The encounter between Zach and Darla Jackson reached a tragic conclusion on State Road 54. As Zach tried to escape the tense situation, he weaved across lanes, attempting to take an off-ramp and put some distance between himself and Darla. However, she continued the chase, driving dangerously fast, reportedly reaching speeds of up to 95 miles per hour. In a heartbreaking moment, Darla's car struck Zach's motorcycle at 81 miles per hour. The impact sent Zach tumbling off his bike, leaving him critically injured. Emergency responders rushed him to a nearby hospital, doing everything they could to save his life.
Witness statements, it appeared that it was a deliberate and intentional act.
Despite their efforts, Zach's injuries were too severe, and he passed away just an hour later. What began as a tense road incident turned into a devastating loss, leaving Zach's loved ones and the community mourning the tragic outcome of that fateful day. Initially charged with murder, Darla Jackson claimed the incident was an accident. In 2017, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, admitting her actions but maintaining she never intended to harm Zach. Despite her defense, which included claims of severe complex trauma disorder and a clean criminal record before the incident, the judge's words echoed through the courtroom as he sentenced her to 6 years in prison. As soon as Darla heard those words, the tears flowed freely and she could no longer hold back her emotions. The courtroom became filled with the sound of her sobs as Darla began to cry uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the reality of the sentence.
And he's gone. And I miss him.
His family and friends were left with an irreplaceable void, while Jackson's actions not only took a life, but also shattered her future and that of her 5-year-old daughter. Zach's family expressed their pain and disappointment in the sentence. His mother, Kathy, said, "It's extremely hard to believe that this has happened to our family."
From a mother's heart, we still find it extremely hard to believe that this has happened to our family.
The tragic death of Zach Bube serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly reckless decisions can lead to irreversible consequences. A moment of anger on the road cost a life, broke a family, and left a community mourning the loss of a beloved service member who had survived countless dangers abroad only to lose his life at home.
They just want justice for Zach, and today was a good start.
Jackson's reckless actions on the road cost a life. Our next case shows heinous acts committed by those who hide behind a badge.
Some of the notes is some of Sherry's friends said that you and her were having a problem because of the John situation.
On February 24, 1986, a nurse named Sherry Rasmussen was found dead in her Los Angeles apartment. She had been brutally attacked by someone who seemed to have a personal motive, and the crime scene was staged to look like a robbery. At first, the case went cold, but after years of investigation, new evidence surfaced. DNA at the scene eventually linked the killer to Stephanie Lazarus, a Los Angeles police officer who had previously dated Sherry's husband. Stephanie Lazarus, a seasoned detective at the time of the murder, killed Sherry after a long-standing grudge over her ex-boyfriend, Sherry's husband. Despite being a member of the police force, Lazarus kept her involvement a secret for more than 2 decades. For many years, Sherry Rasmussen's murder remained unsolved, and Stephanie Lazarus continued her life as if nothing had happened. As an LAPD officer, she maintained her position, keeping up the appearance of an upstanding citizen. But behind the badge, she carried the dark secret of what she had done. The community was left in confusion, trying to make sense of the senseless crime, while Sherry's family, devastated by the loss of their loved one, fought tirelessly for answers. They never lost hope, and their determination to seek justice never wavered. Despite the passage of time, the case remained cold, but in 2009, after more than 2 decades, a breakthrough came. DNA evidence, carefully preserved from the crime scene, was finally linked to Lazarus. The long wait for justice was over. The family, who had lived with the painful uncertainty of Sherry's death, now faced the harsh reality of the truth.
It's a DNA sample, a buccal swab, so we can identify or eliminate you. Would you be willing to do that?
Maybe. Because I know this,
After Stephanie Lazarus was arrested for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen, she denied any involvement and maintained her innocence. She told investigators that she had nothing to do with Sherry's death, but as the case unfolded, the truth started to emerge. It was discovered that on that fateful day in February 1986, Lazarus went to Sherry's apartment. There, she attacked Sherry, striking her with a vase. The violent assault didn't stop there. Lazarus then shot Sherry 3 times in the chest, using a pillow to muffle the sound of the gunshots, making it appear as though the crime was a botched robbery. Lazarus went to great lengths to stage the scene, hoping to confuse the investigators and lead them to believe it was a random crime. Despite her attempts to cover her tracks, the truth was undeniable. The case, which had once been cold, was now a story of betrayal, lies, and a crime that took far too long to uncover.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, guilty of the crime of murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
Lazarus was convicted of first-degree murder in 2012. During the trial, she didn't show any remorse. She gave strange reactions.
I waived time and agreed to continue your arraignment to July 6th this year.
Yes, Your Honor.
Despite her conviction, she was granted parole in 2023. But after public outcry and further examination of her case, a new review panel found good cause to reverse the decision. The family, though relieved, still struggles with the idea that Lazarus might eventually be released. The Rasmussen family felt an overwhelming sense of justice when Lazarus was initially convicted, but the reversal of her parole decision reignited their pain. Sherry's family now hopes for a final decision to keep Lazarus in prison, where they believe she belongs. The prosecutor on the Rasmussen family's behalf read their statement.
Marlise, Marie, and Sarah were so loved by our families, and they are greatly missed. We take solace in finally having the answers we have longed for.
The story of Stephanie Lazarus is a haunting reminder that even those in positions of power, like police officers, are not immune to committing horrific acts. Lazarus's case reveals how even those in power can hide dark secrets. Next, we dive into the case of Taniko Thompson, a young woman whose actions in a moment of desperation would lead to a devastating loss.
Just a little before she did what she done to my son. I can't believe this, really, I can't believe this.
Taniko Thompson, a former Atlanta police officer, was convicted of murdering her boyfriend. She showed no remorse, claiming self-defense, but evidence contradicted her story. In May 2014, Fort Lauderdale witnessed a tragic crime that shook the community. Miami police officer Carl Patrick, known for his dedication and compassion, was found dead in his Pembroke Pines home. His live-in girlfriend, Taniko Thompson, claimed self-defense, but her actions and inconsistencies painted a different picture. Carl Patrick was a dedicated Miami police officer who spent his life serving others. In May 2014, his life was tragically cut short when he was found dead in his Pembroke Pines home, still wearing his uniform. The person responsible was his live-in girlfriend, Taniko Thompson, who claimed she shot Carl in self-defense because he had been offensive. However, prosecutors uncovered troubling facts that cast doubt on her story. After the shooting, Thompson took Carl's phone, preventing him from calling for help. Instead of seeking assistance, she fabricated a pregnancy and even used his credit cards after his death. These actions painted a picture of deceit rather than desperation. Carl's mother, Lucille Patrick, was heartbroken by the loss of her son. She stood firm against Thompson's claim of mistreatment, describing Carl as a kind-hearted man who loved Taniko deeply. "My son was good to that lady and loved her so much he couldn't see the ugly in her," Lucille said, her grief palpable.
My son was good to that lady, and he loved her so much that he could not see the ugly in her.
The trial was filled with conflicting stories, leaving the courtroom divided. Taniko Thompson's family begged for mercy, describing her as a compassionate person and claiming she was a victim of mistreatment. They pleaded with the court to consider her difficult past and alleged struggles. However, the prosecutors presented a very different picture. They argued there was no proof of the mistreatment Thompson had described. Instead, they focused on her actions after the shooting, which appeared calculated and heartless, leaving Carl Patrick to die. Later, she misused his credit cards and faked a pregnancy, showing a lack of remorse and responsibility for her actions. When it was time for sentencing, Thompson addressed Carl's grieving mother. Fighting back tears, she said, "I didn't mean for him to die. I did it to defend myself." But her words didn't bring comfort or change the outcome. The family saw her apology as too little, too late. The court ultimately sided with the evidence, finding Thompson guilty. For Carl's loved ones, her actions spoke louder than words, leaving them with heartbreak and a sense of betrayal they would carry forever. In August 2016, Taniko Thompson was found guilty of second-degree murder. On November 4th, 2016, she was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole, but she didn't show any remorse. Judge Jeffrey Cohen delivered the sentence, bringing a sense of justice to Patrick's loved ones. The courtroom was filled with mixed emotions, sorrow, relief, and anger. Patrick's family and friends hugged, finding some solace in the verdict. Lucille Patrick expressed gratitude, saying he couldn't kill that woman, but she did it. Despite the pain, she found comfort in knowing that her son's killer would be held accountable. The case serves as a grim reminder of how deception and tragedy can intertwine, leaving behind broken hearts and unanswered questions. Breaking news: Evil Lives Here now has merch. Support the channel and grab your gear today. Check the link in the description. Taniko Thompson's actions left a family heartbroken in disbelief. From Wall Street schemers to dangerous predators, these criminals face sentences that stun the world. Their shocked faces in court show the moment they realized their freedom was gone forever. While some received more years than humanly possible to serve, others faced punishment that ended their lives completely. The justice system's message was clear: some crimes demand the ultimate price.